My upbringing took place in a small town situated in central Arkansas. During the deer season in November, my family and I would venture out near our hunting cabin in Mena, Arkansas. The cabin was constructed by my great-grandpa in 1984. The cabin was a pleasant option during that period. Although it's somewhat outdated, it worked out well for me and my family and friends. 2 years ago, Austin and Cody joined me for a preseason hunt called muzzle load hunting in late October. We were exploring a locality that was roughly 1 mile from the cabin to detect any signs of deer as we considered setting up shacks in the vicinity. After dispersing and searching for a suitable spot to set up my bare feet, I came across clumps of rocks in the woods. Upon closer inspection, I discovered it was a grave that belonged to Ed Crane. Our interest was more significant than any other. Having taken a couple of snaps, we found an acceptable spot for our food stand and then proceeded to the cabin. Cody made an effort to research Ed Crane, but he didn't uncover much information. After 3 weeks, we're back in the cabin for the official modern gun season. Austin and I were sitting in the cabin discussing where to go for opening day, and my plan was to try out the muzzle loading season stand that we had previously installed. Austin turned around to go hunting near a small lake off the property, walking about 8.5 miles in the other direction. I left the cabin at 4:45 a.m. as I had walked about a mile in 10 minutes and wanted to be able to walk slowly and get to the stand before daylight. It is prohibited to use vehicles on the hunting trails as this is not a national forest. At the road's end, we split up, with me turning left and Austin following the opposite direction to the stand. The walk was mostly typical. I'd been wandering in these woods since I was 9, and a mile walk wasn't anything out of the ordinary. After my walk, I headed towards the booth and attempted to remain quiet to avoid any potential threats from the deer in the vicinity. As the sun slowly rose, I kept looking straight to my right to see the grave we had found. It was roughly 30 yards away from where I was sitting, and it was buried under the brush. The leaves provided just enough light to show the rock's mound. Something appeared in the left corner of my sight. This was not scary at all. I'm accustomed to seeing movement in the morning while hunting. This was more exciting than anything else. Despite turning left, I was unable to find my intended target. There was no movement. At that point, I heard a nearly silent scream from behind me. My body sprained so badly that I had to shake the stand. Despite tossing my head backwards, there was nothing that caught my eye. I activated my headlamp and spent at least 5 to 6 minutes scanning the area around me before disconnecting my hand radio. As I shook, I radioed Austin to inquire if he was in my vicinity. I was left without a response. I kept calling the radio and looking back for the next 20 minutes. The dawn was approaching, and after thinking it was just in my head, I finally started to relax. The trees were smashed by the rising sun, which removed the thin fog from the woods. This is happening at approximately 7 a.m. The incidents had almost completely slipped my mind. It was Caleb's turn to speak once more. His voice was still muted and screamed. This time, it was sufficient. I rushed to grab my bag and gun. In the stand, I mistakenly left the hand radio on my seat next to me. I sprinted down the ladder at such a fast pace that I almost lost my balance. I fell and quickly walked back to the cabin, watching my back every 10 to 20 steps. Austin was nowhere to be found when I opened the cabin door. he was still in pursuit. Upon his return to the cabin, Austin was perplexed. He persistently inquired if I was screaming into the radio. I shared my experience with him, and he responded by saying that I never cried. While we were discussing it, he had his radio strapped to his belt and was standing in the doorway trying to make sense of what had happened. The radio broadcasted an incoherent screeching noise. It's not a static feedback system. It sounded like an animal was making noise. We sat next to the radio for the entire day, listening attentively. It never happened again. My radio was found by me and my other friend Cody when we returned later that week, both on the ground around the stand. He was absent. He would list to inform, "We have ceased hunting in that place." Hunting in that direction beyond the gate is not our preference. It was the most bizarre and unexplainable thing I've ever encountered. It was a cold December night. Todd and Tristan were spending time with a few friends. There was no entertainment available to us. One of us devised the idea of going to the nearby train station to take pictures and enjoy ourselves. The platform is situated in a distant location from our homes. Upon arrival, we began photographing the liminal space where we were. After a brief outing in that location, the temperature dropped and we felt hungry. We initiated the journey to our car. A canal is crossed by an extended footbridge on our way back. We spent some time on the bridge joking around and taking additional photos. The mood was unstoppable, but the cold kept us from getting any warmer, so we resumed our journey. The bridge was too narrow for us to walk from one end to the other. Todd and Tristan were behind me as I walked in front. We were joking around and talking as we walked. I turned around to listen to what Tristan was saying, and then I saw a man walking feet behind me, which made me laugh. He appeared to be in his late 30s. He was dressed in a black and white plaid shirt and ball cap, with his face dirty. He had his arms bowed. A cigarette and a large kitchen knife were both in close proximity, as the weather was clear. I felt a sudden drop in my blood when I saw it. I rapidly scurried back, pretending to have missed him. I had a feeling that it was the most suitable choice for me. I was on my way to the bridge's end in a hurry when my fight or flight kicked off. I aspired that my friends would follow me and do the same. I glanced at them to check and they were luckily on my tail. Nonetheless, the man was also. The proximity of the individual made it difficult for anyone to believe that he was among them. He departed from the bridge and proceeded towards the right. Even after spending some time in that location, my friends were still unaware of the man's whereabouts. Fearing the possibility of defending myself, I held my tripod up like an axe. The man appeared to be aware of the situation and headed towards the left. After a brief walk, we brought him over and I told Todd what was going on in the area. The man disappeared into the darkness as we watched him walk backwards. We rushed back to the car. We drove to the nearest gas station, got some food and talked it over. It wasn't until recently, after I looked at the photos taken that night, that I realized the whole thing was a strange story. Todd is captured in this image standing on the station platform, positioned under a light. The man's figure is situated almost behind a freight car, beyond the light. The photograph was taken 30 minutes before the incident on the bridge, indicating that he was keeping an eye on us and waiting for us to turn away from the cameras. It's common to hear tales of such incidents, but you never thought it would happen to you. I can't help but wonder how it could have turned out. After getting married, my husband and I purchased a house in southeastern North Carolina while he served in the military. Despite its military reputation, the town was not a safe place to live. We heard gunshots on the street where we were standing one night. His job meant that he was frequently absent for training operations. He was employed on weekends when he didn't have to travel. This meant I was at home alone for most of the time. I was in college full-time, so I could pass the time by doing a lot of studying and homework to myself when he wasn't home. While I was asleep with my dog Simba, we heard a loud noise coming from above while we were in bed writing an essay. Simba's barking and growling were uncommon, as he had never done before. His pit bull mix has never displayed such intimidating behavior, despite people considering him to be a big baby. I had the impression that it was mice, so I sent a text to my husband and he agreed. In the days that followed, he promised to call for pest control so I wouldn't have to worry about laying bait and traps myself. After 2 days, pest control arrived and conducted a thorough inspection of the house. He used baits and sealed entryways into our home after finding mice and roaches in the attic. Over the next week, the rustling became more and more severe, reaching its peak at night. Whenever I heard something, Simba would become uneasy and his hair would appear to be up on his back at one point. My husband contacted me after the incident and told me that the mice were intimidating Simba. As I was about to go to sleep, I thought I heard footsteps from above. The fact that my dog didn't hear me, I thought, was just psyching myself out. Being alone at home often resulted in anxiety, particularly during nighttime, as I didn't feel secure without my husband around. The following day, I slept pretty late and got up with a fever, so I wasn't feeling very good. I rose to release Simba. The arrangement of the house was peculiar. The garage was the only way to access the backyard, and the attic entrance was situated above it. Walking towards the door, I experienced a feeling of vomiting. The reason for the door smudges and dirty handprints was not illness, but rather an internal issue. There was someone present. I thought someone had smashed through the garage door in the middle of the night, so I snapped a picture and called the police. While I was waiting for the police, I sent a text message to my husband inquiring about the situation, but he chose to be off work. Just minutes later, the police arrived at their station located just down the road. I displayed the handprints and explained how someone could have broken in, as they would hear the garage door being opened. The rustling I heard could have been from human hands. The police were able to check up on the attic right away after I shared my thoughts with them. A man who lived across the street from our house had a methodical approach, and he chose not to stay at his family's home. He then sneaked into our garage and resided there for just over 10 days while I was away. Due to his hiding behind boxes, pest control missed him. It seems like the inspector's level of detail was not quite what I had anticipated. Our Ring security system failed to detect the guy who entered our home on camera, so it's likely that he had a different approach. It's fortunate that we no longer reside in that particular abode or neighborhood, and even though this happened a few years back, I still feel uneasy about being alone at home for any length of time. I'm relieved that nobody was harmed. It was in the year 2006. My college acquaintances, Stephen and Heather, had migrated to the same residence. I was employed at a radio station, working there overnight time several times per week. To keep my body in check, I adhered to a consistent schedule during my evenings, which meant that I would spend an excessive amount of time on my hands. My preferred activity was to wander through a cemetery in close proximity to my home, especially late into the night or after midnight. I would frequently bring a camera to the tape recorder to capture anything that seemed out of the ordinary. Several times I took this, and there were some photos of activity, apparently an odd ball of color floating near a bench. While driving home one night, I heard the cassette tape playback of what I had just recorded on the tape in my car. Despite being the only one present on the tape, I had inquired if anyone was with us. A strange, tired voice gave a straightforward answer of no, as if to assert that we were the only ones present. I had just gotten off the road when I heard this, feeling uneasy and terrified. Although I understand the purpose of my actions, I was uncertain about how to react if I had made an error. Upon my arrival home, I surprised my roommate to find some peace. He was apathetic and advised me not to bring that substance into the house. It was a bizarre turn of events shortly after the incident. While I was watching videos on my computer in my room one night, the decorative leaves on the wall started to swing back and forth, as if they had been hit. I had returned home after buying some things in the store on a different evening. While in my room, I discovered a plastic bag from the store on the floor. I was lying in bed when the bag began to crackle, resembling the sound of your hands crushing a bag. I glanced at the bag. It was simply sitting there. This noise persisted, and I soon found myself moving and hopping around on the floor alone. I got up from my chair, stood on my bed, and dialed my roommate's number on the phone as she was positioned higher. I urged them to go down the stairs and get to my room as soon as possible. The bag stopped moving and making noises as soon as I got off the phone. When I told my roommate about what happened, he was shocked to the core and thought I was crazy. He took the bag out and inspected it for any signs of a mouse or something in it, but none were found. I experienced one of my worst recurring nightmares in that room as well. My dreams have been recurring since I was young, and they seem to make my eyes go blank. It occurs either after I wake up or before I go to sleep. I can barely articulate words to make my chatter stop, as my teeth are constantly chirping. I am completely ignorant of this. There have been instances where I have experienced some unpleasant consequences as a result of this. There was a moment when I felt hands reaching for me. I stumbled upon an unsettling visage in the closet on a separate occasion. I experienced an early slumber in the room one night, and during the period between awakeness and asleep, this pattern repeated itself. Initially, it was very feeble and I mocked it, as that is the most appropriate approach. However, it gained strength and was a formidable adversary to overcome. The experience was akin to being stuck for 30 seconds without getting out of this formidable force. Despite not being physically affected, I felt like my body was spinning and immobile. Eventually, it came to a halt. The cause of this is uncertain, as I am unsure if it is sleep paralysis or the activity in the room that caused it. At 5 a.m. on the first day of our lives, we were awakened by the sound of huge footsteps running through our doorway. All individuals, except for me, were sleeping in bed. He was never this loud, even when he was upstairs. It's possible that it came from a military base in our vicinity. The succession of loud booming stomps was like the footsteps of a massive individual. Despite the confusion and mystery surrounding all of this, my roommate and and I only became aware of our presence in the house after taking a picture of us in their living area one night. We were having a party. I'm taking a picture of us in the living room with our enormous mirror on the wall. I was holding my camera with the least amount of effort. However, there is activity happening all around us. It seems improbable to me what the strange lights on the right side of the lamp are. We don't have any lights in our house that emit such a bright light. A peculiar halo of light that resembles a figure is visible to the right of that. A body containing eyes, a face, and spooky smile is the most peculiar feature of the yellow light that is constantly flashing between Steven and me. Our kitchen light reflected a lot of yellow, maybe. I've attempted to capture the same picture again, but the yellow lights are no longer visible. Whether it was something from the cemetery that followed me home, or if there was someone present before we moved in, I'm not sure. What I told you was the worst part. We moved out of that house about 10 months later, without informing any future renters or tenants. John, one of my friends, was 27 and his ex-friend Rich was around the same age. Rich, to put it mildly, was a very brave man. At the time, John was having difficulty making life choices and had very few friends. Rich and John were part of a group of individuals who enjoy using life safety equipment, such as fire alarms, exit signs, and other related devices. It's a peculiar pastime, but they're out there. Rich had a problem with breaking into abandoned structures and taking these devices without any explanation. He would then bring them home, collect them, or sell them on eBay. Although John didn't believe it was the right thing to do, he was in dire need of a companion and went along with him on his journey. John's adventure turned into a nightmare. Gary, Indiana was the destination of their journey on November 18th, 2019. The place is not the most secure in the world, to put it mildly. The journey would involve staying at a hotel in Hammond, which is close by, and exploring abandoned schools to acquire old and often rare life safety equipment. They were doing well until November 20th. Around 7 in the evening, John and Rich went to the deserted Horace S. Norton Elementary School located at 1356 Harrison Boulevard. They commenced walking up to the first floor. The doors were extremely wide open. Smelled of sewage, skunk, and SHT. The building's north end wing was where they proceeded to. Rich was observed by John tearing down several old exit signs. John and I are against it, but John was in dire need of a companion. The cafeteria was entered by them as they descended towards the south side of the building. The only thing missing was the beam of their flashlights. Graffiti, desks, and books were scattered throughout. The customary ruined building sightings. John was photographing the entire time. They proceeded to the gym after entering the cafeteria. John was unaware that his life would forever change. John spotted a trail of blood with his flashlight, and out of curiosity, he went to investigate. The outcome was quite unsettling. A woman aged 27 deposited her corpse in a pool of blood. It was as ghastly as hell. According to John, we had our arms up and her hands were in the shape of a dinosaur. John's description of the scene made me feel like I was going to bed for a couple of nights. Rich heard John's screams and ran towards him, with Rich whispering, "Sure, they might hear you." John was shook by the situation and showed Rich the body, telling him to be quiet and pretend not to worry about anything. They departed without delay, but evidently with trembling. Upon their return to the hotel, John immediately called the police. It was true that the woman had been missing for 2 days. A text message was quickly traced by the police to Adriana Sosato, a 27-year-old woman who had recently been murdered. The suspects had intentions of stealing marijuana and an iPhone, which she was apparently planning to purchase. They were responsible for her death after the robbery went wrong. She had already dragged her body into the elementary school gym and left it there for good measure just 1 day before John and Rich arrived. The teen killer was quickly apprehended and taken into custody by the police. The adolescent also became someone else. The story is currently being broadcasted on television, and all of these children were charged as adults. The reason for John's withdrawal from Rich was unmistakable, and it still affects my relationship with him.